A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. Imagine you are a surgeon in the middle of a delicate procedure, or a technician at a cooling tower in a nuclear plant. Suddenly, a small black plastic box on your hip starts vibrating and chirping a rhythmic, piercing tone. It is not a smartphone. It does not have a high-resolution OLED screen or a camera. It has a tiny monochrome LCD displaying a string of digits. This is a pager, a piece of technology that most people associate with the era of Nirvana and pagers and beepers. But in 2026, it is still the backbone of global critical infrastructure. Today's prompt from Daniel is about the surprising persistence of these physical pagers, the software trying to kill them off like PagerDuty, and whether Android pagers are actually a thing or just a marketing myth.
Herman Poppleberry here, and I have to say, Daniel really hit on a fascinator. Most people think of pagers as digital fossils, but the physics of why they still exist is actually beautiful. By the way, today's episode is powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash, which is handling our script generation. But getting back to the fossils, the reality is that in 2025, data from the American Hospital Association showed that pager usage in U.S. hospitals actually increased by 3%. We are talking about 80% of hospitals still relying on this legacy tech for their most critical alerts.
It's wild to think that in a world of 5G and satellite-linked iPhones, we're still clipping plastic rectangles to our belts. You'd think the sheer inconvenience of carrying two devices would have killed the pager by now. I mean, I can barely remember to charge my watch, let alone a second communication device that only speaks in numbers.
That is exactly the point, though. The inconvenience is the feature. A pager is a single-purpose tool, and in critical environments, single-purpose beats multi-purpose every time. It does not need to update its operating system in the middle of a shift. It does not get distracted by Instagram notifications. It just listens for one specific frequency.
I guess there's no doom scrolling on a pager. But how does that work in practice for a doctor? If you get a string of numbers, you still have to find a phone to call back, right? Isn't that a massive bottleneck in an emergency?
It sounds like a bottleneck, but it's actually a controlled workflow. When that pager chirps, the doctor knows exactly what it means. Stop what you are doing and find a landline. In a hospital, those landlines are everywhere. They are hardwired, they don't have dead zones, and they provide crystal clear voice quality. By forcing the transition from a portable alert to a fixed line response, the system ensures the doctor is in a stable environment to receive complex instructions. It's a physical protocol.
Okay, let's dive into the why here. Because single purpose is a nice philosophical argument, but there have to be hard technical reasons why a hospital administrator in 2026 is still cutting checks to a paging service provider.
There are three massive technical pillars: penetration, battery, and reliability. Let's start with penetration. Smartphones rely on cellular networks, usually in the 1800 MHz to 2100 MHz range, or even higher for 5G. Those high-frequency waves are great for data, but they are terrible at getting through lead-lined radiology walls, basement concrete, or the massive steel structures of an industrial plant. Pagers, on the other hand, usually operate on the 150 MHz or 450 MHz bands. Those are much longer wavelengths. They wrap around obstacles and penetrate deep into buildings where your cell signal bars go to die.
So it's basically the slow and steady wins the race of the radio world. The signal is low bandwidth, but it's essentially unstoppable.
Precisely. Think of it like a bass drum versus a flute. A flute's high notes are easily blocked by a closed door, but you can feel the thumping of a bass drum through the walls of an entire apartment building. That is the 150 megahertz signal. It finds a way in.
And then you have the network architecture. Cellular is a two-way conversation. Your phone has to constantly talk back to the tower to stay registered. That drains battery like crazy. A pager is a passive receiver. It just sits there, listening. It doesn't transmit anything back. That is why a single AA battery can power a pager for a month or two, whereas your smartphone is a brick by dinner time if you're in a low-signal area.
And remember, in a disaster, you can't assume there's a USB-C cable and a wall outlet available every 8 hours. If the power goes out in a region, a doctor with a pager and a pocket full of AA batteries is still reachable for weeks. A surgeon with a dead iPhone is just a guy with an expensive paperweight.
I love the irony that the smart device dies because it's trying too hard to be helpful, while the dumb device just hangs out and survives. But what about the reliability of the network itself? We've all seen what happens during a stadium concert or a local emergency. The cell towers get congested and nothing goes through.
That is the third pillar. Paging networks use simulcast technology. When an alert is sent, every single transmitter in the region broadcasts that same signal at the same time on the same frequency. There is no handover between towers. There is no congestion in the traditional sense because the pager isn't trying to negotiate a data session. It just catches the broadcast. It's like a radio station. If you can hear the signal, you get the message. In a mass casualty event or a major power outage, cellular networks often collapse under the load. The paging network just keeps humming along.
Does that mean the signal is less secure, though? If it's just a broadcast, can't anyone with a cheap radio scanner listen in on patient data?
That was a huge issue in the past. In the early 2000s, you could absolutely sit in a hospital parking lot with a laptop and a scanner and read every page. But modern paging protocols have evolved. Many systems now use AES encryption. The message is broadcast to everyone, but only the pager with the correct digital key can unscramble the digits. It's a broadcast private model.
So, the hardware is staying put for the foreseeable future in those high-stakes niches. But Daniel also asked about Android pagers. I've seen these ruggedized handhelds that look like the scanners delivery drivers use. Is that what we're talking about? Or is an Android pager just a smartphone with a very loud app?
That is a great distinction. In 2026, the Android pager is essentially a rebranding of ruggedized enterprise devices. Think of companies like Zebra or Kyocera, the Zebra TC21 or the Kyocera Duraforce series. These aren't pagers in the radio sense. They don't have 150 megahertz receivers. They are high-end Android smartphones built to military standards for drop resistance and waterproofing.
So, they're just phones in a suit of armor.
Mostly, yes, but the paging part comes from the software layer. Hospitals and warehouses put these devices into kiosk mode. They lock the UI down so the user can only access specific communication apps. They often have a dedicated physical button on the side, a PTT or push to talk button that works like a walkie-talkie. It's an attempt to bridge the gap, give the worker the one-button simplicity of a pager, but the data-rich environment of Android.
It sounds like the worst of both worlds if you aren't careful. You lose the incredible signal penetration of the low-frequency RF, and you keep the battery drain of a full-color screen and a cellular modem.
You're not wrong. That is why many hospitals that tried to switch entirely to these smart pagers found themselves installing massive Wi-Fi mesh networks inside every single room just to ensure the pagers actually worked. It becomes a huge CapEx project. You're not just buying a device, you're rebuilding your entire internal signal infrastructure because you gave up the 150 megahertz advantage.
Which brings us to the software side of the house. If you are an IT professional or a developer, you aren't carrying a physical beeper. You're using PagerDuty. Daniel mentioned this specifically. PagerDuty is like the cloud-native evolution of the pager, but it's doing something very different under the hood.
PagerDuty is fascinating because it doesn't actually provide the last mile of the physical signal. It orchestrates the who and the when. In 2024, PagerDuty processed over 2.5 billion alerts. Think about the logic required there. It's not just send a text, it's send a text to Susan. If she doesn't acknowledge in 5 minutes, call her. If she doesn't answer the call, alert the entire DevOps team and then escalate to the VP of engineering.
It's basically a digital nagging machine, an incredibly sophisticated, reliable nagging machine.
It is, and it uses every last mile available. It will send a push notification, an SMS, an automated phone call, and even integrate with Slack or Microsoft Teams. The brilliance of PagerDuty is that it abstracts the complexity of on-call schedules. It knows who is on the clock, who is on vacation, and what the severity of the incident is. It is the software-defined pager.
But how does it handle the human element? Like, if I'm the one on call and I'm in a movie theater, does PagerDuty have a way to scream louder than my phone's silent mode?
Yes, and that is a critical feature. On iOS and Android, PagerDuty uses critical alerts. These are special permissions that allow the app to bypass the physical mute switch and the do not disturb settings. It can play a sound at maximum volume even if your phone is set to silent. It's the digital equivalent of that piercing chirp from the old plastic boxes.
But it's still reliant on the internet. If PagerDuty's AWS region goes down, or if your local cell tower is toast, Susan isn't getting that alert.
That is the trade-off. PagerDuty is built for the five nines of the software world, but it is fundamentally a SaaS software as a service. If the backbone of the internet has a bad day, the alerts stop flowing. This is why Daniel also mentions self-hostable software relays. This is the prepper version of paging.
I know Daniel is a big fan of Pushover for his personal stuff. He mentioned that in his notes. Pushover is great because it's simple. You send an HTTP request to their API, and a notification shows up on your phone with a custom sound in high priority. But what about the truly self-hosted stuff, like Gotify or NTFI.she?
Those are the gold standard for people who want total control. Gotify is a great example. You run a small server, maybe on a Raspberry Pi or a local VM, and it maintains a persistent WebSocket connection to your Android device. When your server sees an issue, it pushes the alert directly to your phone over your local Wi-Fi or VPN.
What's the advantage of that over just getting an email?
Latency and interruptibility. Standard mobile OS behavior is to batch notifications to save battery. If you get an email, your phone might not tell you about it for 10 minutes. Gotify and NTFI.sh use what we call always-on connections. They bypass the standard battery-saving delays. The moment the server sends it, your phone chirps, and because it's self-hosted, your data never leaves your network. If your internet goes out, but your internal Wi-Fi is still up, your local server can still page you about a basement flood sensor or a server room overheating.
I can see the appeal for the home lab crowd. It's like having your own private paging carrier in your closet. But let's look at the bigger picture. If I'm a business, why would I pick a self-hosted relay over a behemoth like PagerDuty or OpsGenie?
It usually comes down to two things, cost and complexity. PagerDuty is expensive. They charge per user and it adds up fast. If you just have a small team of 3 people managing a few local servers, paying hundreds of dollars a month for an escalation engine is overkill. A self-hosted relay is free, or nearly free. But the hidden cost is that you are now the one responsible for making sure the paging system itself doesn't go down. It's the classic who watches the watchman problem. If your Gotify server crashes, who pages you to tell you that the pager is broken?
It's turtles all the way down. You need a second Gotify server to watch the first one, and then a physical beeper to watch the second one.
You joke, but that is exactly how mission-critical systems are designed. They have heartbeat monitors. If the paging system doesn't check in every 60 seconds, a secondary, completely independent system triggers an alarm. This brings us back to why the dumb physical pager is still king in hospitals. It is the absolute bottom of the stack. It doesn't rely on your Wi-Fi, your local VM host, or your internet service provider. It relies on a high-powered RF transmitter and a battery.
We've talked about the old tech, the RF pagers, and the current tech like PagerDuty. But what about the future? Daniel mentioned satellite messaging. We're seeing more and more of this in consumer phones. Apple's emergency SOS via satellite, the new Starlink direct-to-cell capabilities. Is the satellite the true successor to the pager?
It might be. The physics are starting to align. Satellite messaging solves the penetration and emergency problems in a different way. Instead of trying to punch a signal through a building from a local tower, you're getting a line-of-sight signal from space. Now, it still doesn't work great deep inside a lead-lined basement, but for a technician at a remote substation or a forest ranger, it's a game changer.
But wait, satellite latency is famously high. If I'm paging someone about a heart attack, can I really wait for a satellite to orbit into position, or for a high latency handshake?
With the new LEO low Earth orbit constellations like Starlink, that latency is dropping to milliseconds. The real hurdle is link budget. You need a clear view of the sky. So, a doctor in the middle of a concrete hospital won't benefit from satellite, but a field engineer in the middle of the Mojave Desert will. It's another tool in the redundancy belt.
It feels like we're heading toward a world where the pager isn't a device, but a priority level for data.
That is exactly where the industry is moving. We are seeing the convergence of low-power displays, like e-ink and low-power wide-area networks, or LPWAN. Imagine an e-ink badge that you wear on your scrubs. It uses almost zero battery. It stays on all the time, showing your name and department. But when a code blue is called, it uses a LoRaWAN signal, which is a long-range, low-frequency radio protocol, to flash a bright red LED and update the screen with the room number.
That sounds like a smart pager that actually respects the physics of why we like the dumb ones.
It is. It's appropriate technology. It's not trying to be a phone, it's trying to be a better version of that black plastic box from 1994. And it can integrate with hospital systems to show lab results or patient names, which the old school pagers couldn't do.
You know, we should probably address one of the elephants in the room when it comes to pagers lately. There was a lot of news recently about pagers being used as, well, let's just say kinetic devices in geopolitical conflicts. Daniel specifically mentioned in his notes that we should steer clear of jokes about Mossad or explosive pagers, and I think that's a good call, but it does highlight a technical point about supply chain security.
It really does. When you have a device that is meant to be always on and always listening, the integrity of that hardware is paramount. For decades, we treated pagers as these benign, simple devices. But the recent events showed that even dumb tech can be a vector if the supply chain is compromised. It's making a lot of organizations rethink where their hardware is manufactured and how it's audited.
It's a reminder that there is no such thing as set it and forget it when it comes to security. Even a beeper needs a security audit in 2026.
But let's get back to the practical side for our listeners. If you're a developer or a hobbyist and you want to implement a pager-like experience for your own life, maybe for your home security system or your server monitors, what's the move?
If I'm doing it, I'm starting with pushover. It's just too easy. It cost me $5 for a lifetime license years ago, and it has never failed me. The API is trivial to use. You can wrap it in a simple shell script. If your backup fails, curl a request to pushover, and your phone screams at you.
I agree for most people, but if you want to be truly mission critical for your home lab, I'd suggest looking at ntfi.sheesh. The reason is that NTFI is completely open source and you can self-host the server. You can even use it without an account. It's incredibly lightweight. And for the Android users out there, NTFI has a great feature where it can wake up the device even if it's in deep sleep mode.
How does it do that? I thought Android's doze mode was pretty ruthless about killing background connections to save power.
It is, but NTFI uses a persistent foreground service with a tiny network footprint. It basically tells the OS, I am a critical communication pipe, do not shut me down. It's much more reliable than waiting for the standard Google Cloud messaging or Firebase push notifications, which can sometimes be delayed by several minutes if the OS thinks your phone is just sitting idle on a nightstand.
And what about the physical element? Is there a way for a regular person to get a real pager anymore?
You can actually still buy service. There are companies like Pagers Direct or American Messaging. You can pay about $15 to $20 a month, and they will give you a real, honest-to-God 150 megahertz pager and a phone number. People call the number, leave a callback code, and your hip starts buzzing.
Who is doing that? Besides doctors and Batman?
You'd be surprised. Volunteer firefighters, search and rescue teams, and even some people who just want a digital detox. They give their real phone number only to family and their pager number to work. If the pager goes off, they know it's an actual emergency. If the phone rings, they can ignore it. It creates a physical barrier between urgent and noise.
I actually love that. It's using an old limitation as a modern boundary. In a world where every app is fighting for your dopamine, a device that can only say, "Call this number," is almost a form of meditation.
A very loud, chirping meditation. But seriously, the takeaway for anyone in IT or critical infrastructure is to audit your alerting stack. How many hops are there between the problem and the human? If your server goes down, does it have to go through a local monitor, then a cloud aggregator, then a SaaS alerting tool, then a cellular carrier, and finally to a smartphone app that might be muted by Do Not Disturb mode?
That's a lot of points of failure. Every and then, in that sentence, is a chance for the message to die.
A real emergency SOP standard operating procedure should have a bypass route. If the high-level software stack fails, is there a simpler, lower-level way to get the word out? Maybe that's a physical siren or a direct-to-radio paging transmitter.
It reminds me of those emergency buttons you see in old movies. They aren't connected to a computer, they're just a physical wire connected to a bell. There is a beauty in that simplicity that we've lost by trying to make everything smart.
We have, and we see the consequences. Remember the 2024 Cleveland Clinic network outage? The hospital's entire internal data network went dark. All those smart Android pagers and tablets? Bricks. They couldn't talk to the servers. But the legacy RF paging system? It was on a completely different physical infrastructure. It didn't care that the Wi-Fi was down. The doctors were still getting their pages. That is the aha moment for any administrator. Redundancy isn't just having two of the same thing, it's having two of different things.
Diversity of technology is the real insurance policy. So, to answer Daniel's question, yes, pages are very much alive. They aren't just still used. They are actively preferred in the places where life and death are on the line.
And Android pagers are really just rugged smartphones playing dress-up. They are useful for data-rich environments, but they shouldn't be your only line of defense if you're worried about network resilience.
I think we've covered the ground here, from the physics of 150 megahertz waves to the API logic of PagerDuty. It's a weirdly persistent niche, but once you look at the math and the physics, it makes all the sense in the world.
It really does. It's about matching the tool to the risk. If the risk is, I might miss a funny meme, a smartphone is fine. If the risk is the reactor core is melting, you want the simplest, dumbest piece of plastic you can find.
Well said. I think that's our deep dive for today. If you're listening and you've got a pager story, maybe you still carry one, or you've built a wild self-hosted alerting system, we want to hear about it.
We really do. Send those stories or your own weird prompts to show@myweirdprompts.com.
Big thanks to our producer, Hilbert Flumentop, for keeping the wheels on this bus.
And thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show's generation.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you are enjoying the show, a quick review on your podcast app really helps us reach new listeners.
We'll see you next time.
Stay alert, but maybe turn off the notifications every once in a while. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My